You ready?
I'm ready, Gary.
How ready are you? Are you really ready?
I'm as ready as I'm gonna be.
Okay, let me just say a few words by way of introduction. And first of all, just a little disclaimer. I was talking to Tarak earlier, and we were talking about this whole thing, and he was saying, sometimes these interviews, when they go on for a long time, they get to be a little boring, which I was well aware of right from the beginning. At the same time, I want people to, be able to express themselves fully, and if it goes on and on, so be it, because if I'm not making too much of this, I'm considering this, for history, historical document kind of thing, and who knows, people may want to do some research, but I don't know.
Encyclopedias have lots of boring stuff in them. You got to be willing to go through it and find what you need. So
You know, that's what I'm feeling. And also, if somebody wants to do a PhD in the future on Sri Chinmoy disciples, they're gonna have to wade through all this stuff. But
that's
anyway,
right. Well, you got to make them work for those PhDs.
what?
You got to make them work for those PhDs. You don't want to hand it to them.
No, no. They have to earn their stripes. Well, you were a disciple. I didn't know you told me you were a disciple in the late 70s and early 80s out in San Francisco. Now, the interesting thing for me, I was a disciple from 70 to 80, but on the East Coast. Unless people visited from the West Coast, I had no idea what was going on out there. So why don't you describe the West Coast experience? Was it different, do you think, than the East Coast experience, the Parsons Boulevard experience?
Well, it seemed a lot different. I my experience of the East Coast was going back there for celebrations, and then a couple other times when I was back there at non-celebration times. The East Coast was a little more cranked up, in the center. Just I think kind of like everything back there is a little more cranked up.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's a tough one to really say how different it was. It was the San Francisco Center, of the West Coast centers. We thought we were the awesomest, right? So we felt like we had to sort of set the tone for the West Coast centers. So we had to be kind of more extreme and more devoted and more dedicated and run around a lot more. So it was pretty intense out here. There were no beers in the refrigerator.
Uh-oh. Well, we had a few beers tucked away. Well, our experience was a little different. It was very intense, but at the same time, since we were right in the neighborhood and we saw Guru quite a bit, I think some of us, I can only speak for the guys I knew, because of course we didn't have too much contact with the girls, God forbid. So we hung out with the guys most. We had a more relaxed attitude. We said, hey, look, Guru, as I mentioned in my interview the other day, the attitude was like, hey, Guru's taking care of us. All we have to do is put up posters, report for duty, get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and pray for the Nobel Prize. Somebody's calling me, but you know what? I gotta tell him.
You gotta turn that shit off, Gary.
I'm turning. Hold on. I'm turning this shit off. All right, that shit is off. Anyway. I was saying, like, we had the attitude we didn't have to do too much because Guru was taking care of it. But I can see if you're
at the same time you were doing a lot, right? And that's the same thing was true out here. Your value as a disciple and where you kind of were in the hierarchy was really determined by how much you ran around, right? And how much sleep you didn't get. So, looking back at the whole thing, it seems much more like kind of from that side, it's more of a karma yoga kind of path. Right. It was more about service, and at least in terms of the perception of it, the perception of you by other disciples and your perception of them, that was the measure of how good a disciple you were, was how much selfless service you did, how much you were willing to sort of go beyond the bounds, to do what was needed, all that sort of stuff. And that was also a great excuse for a lot of hilarious stuff that we did, particularly in association with the running club.
Oh, God.
Sanjaban and I were great friends, and so when the running club out here was happening, we were putting on all these races, and after doing a few, I think Sundari was actually in charge of it, and after doing a few, it became clear we were looking for these things. We really needed some way to kind of cordon off areas and create lanes and keep cars from killing people and stuff. So we needed some kind of like cones or something to mark these things off. And there was no money to buy it, so Sanjaban and I started doing what we called coning, which meant in the dead of night, preferably after like 11 or so, we would cruise around the city in his little Toyota Corolla looking for orphan cones out there. And started out just picking up kind of ratty ones and stuff like that. But then after a while, since we were serving the Lord and all, we started feeling really good about it. And we would just grab them from construction sites. The pinnacle was being downtown and seeing a PG&E truck parked somewhere downtown San Francisco with a stack of cones. There were like 10 cones stacked up on the front of this truck, and the guy inside was dead asleep. I went out and lifted the thing right off the truck and tossed it right in the back. So, I kind of previously had a, adolescence. I won't say I was a juvenile delinquent, but if I hadn't joined the center, I would have become a juvenile delinquent. Probably would have died, actually. So, that was just pure fun. That was just pure fun for the Lord.
And you mentioned one of the funniest guys in the world. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, Sanjaban. I got so much a kick out of Sanjaban. He was living up in Massachusetts. I went up to see his film festival when they showed his films, and that whole story about the burying the sacred lamb at Jamaica. Yeah, Jamaica. What was her name? Yogamai.
Maya, yeah.
Maya at the high school, Jamaica High School, was one of the most hilarious stories. But it only points out that when you're working for the Lord, it gives you a lot of leeway. I mean, we've all done a lot of crazy shit in the name of the Lord. Like, hey, I'm doing it for Guru. I can smuggle this exotic bird past customs, and get it. Sure. You can do a whole lots of stuff because you're working for the Lord, which can, it can be funny on one hand, and then if it goes too far, it can be dangerous. I have a funny story now because you're mentioning this thing, going out in the middle of the night and stealing cones and setting them up to the disciples can have running lanes. We were talking about another really funny and really wacky disciple, but I love him to death. He's still in the center. Dada Casey. Casey.
Oh, yeah.
What the hell? Casey Waters or something. Anyway, what he used to do in the middle of the night, because Guru wanted to make sure his strides weren't too wide and they weren't too small. So Dada Beer would steal out in the middle of the night with this white paint, which is not another illegal thing to do, by the way. You can't be marking up New York City streets with white paint. Anyway, he would whatever Guru told him to do. I want my strides, good boy, to be 18 inches or 23.5, whatever. And he would be 3 o'clock in the morning on his hands and knees marking these hash marks up and down like Parsons Boulevard, because we got in trouble. The center got in trouble eventually because the cops came along and said, hey, you can't do this. And then who knows what happened. But he used to be out there doing all kinds of stuff because we would do anything for the Supreme, right? So that gave us the license to do anything.
That's where that whole thing comes from, is, you're saying the end justifies the means. I mean, the thing about, I remember that bit about marking the stride marks back then, and that's really nutty. I mean, that's one of the things that should have been red flags for us at the time and weren't, because, normal human rules don't apply because this guy's an avatar or whatever.
Right,
But that should have been a red flag right there, right? Okay, so like, you're a runner, you want to be a runner, you want to be in tune with what your body wants to do, right? You want to create no obstacles. You don't want to try to predispose it to do this or that, right? You want to be the way it wants to be. But no, you've decided that this is how long your stride should be, and you're going to force it into it. I mean, there's a huge difference right there, to me, between being authentic and having knowledge of self and having a predetermined idea of what you're supposed to be like and then trying to shoehorn yourself into that, right? That's one of the, I got some of those red flags when I was in the center. I got some of them, but some of them I missed.
Well,
that's a perfect example of one right there.
You know what? I think this is a good topic, and we said in the beginning before we went broadcast, we don't really have anything to say. We don't know what we're going to say, but I think the red flag thing is a good thing to talk about. I want to talk about it, but I want to add something to what you're saying about shoehorning yourself in. On one hand, yes, Guru would say to Dada Beer, I want my strides to be 25.3 inches. But then, you know what? 3 days later, he'd come up with something else, and he'd change his mind. He said, "Oh no. Krishna's soul came to me, or something, or the divine Kali told me that's not the right. My stride should be 24 points." He'd come up with all kinds of crazy shit. And then everybody would have to, turn on a dime and then run and paint, race the 23 point whatever and put in the 24. I mean, because we would do some absolutely crazy shit in the name of Guru, and at the time you were saying red flags, but at the time we're so caught up like little rodents on a treadmill. You're on a treadmill. You can't. There's no time to think like, holy shit, is this guy? Is this the avatar of the age, or is this just some whacked out guy? We didn't have time for that. But the red flags, in my case, and I'm sure in your case too, eventually started popping up a little too frequently and a little too prominently.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the problem with, when you're an avatar, you can't go down to the avatar club and hang out with your avatar friends. There's a problem with not having any friends, and the big problem with not having friends is there's no one to say, dude, you're way off the edge here. If you don't have people in your life that can do that for you, you get really eccentric, and eccentric equals crazy. Yeah.
And let me just say another thing, because this morning I was posting to our group we were talking about Dada Beer, and you know what? Speaking of the avatar having no friends, not only did he have no friends and guys who could, give him a little reality check, like as you say, like Krista
right.
come over and say, yo, as an avatar, you're not supposed to do that shit. No, but on the other hand, you had people like Casey or Dada Beer pumping Guru up. I was there on the porch many a day when Dada Beer and people like him, Ashrita and the girls,
right.
say, "Oh, Guru, you're so great. Nobody was ever as great as you. Vivekananda was nothing. We are so lucky to be with the great." So now, obviously, not only does he have no friends, but he's got these yes men and yes women around him pumping him up. So no wonder he thinks he could change his mind on a dime and do whatever the hell he wants to do. In other words, the universe is revolving around him.
That's just stupid, right? I mean, even now, if you're like a manager or a VP or whatever in a corporation, you kind of know. I mean, there's the kind of consciousness that if you're surrounded with people like that, it's not going to go well for you. You don't really want that. Anyone who's got half a brain, knows that that's just fluffing you up, and it's actually not a good thing. It blinds you, whatever. Anyway.
Well, anyway, let's talk about red flags. So what were some of the red flags for you? I mean, I'm assuming you were just like everybody else, a devoted disciple, and then all of a sudden these things started popping up.
Yeah, okay, well, red flag, great topic. When I joined, I was very serious. I was 100% serious. I mean, joining the center honestly did save my life. I'm pretty sure I'd be dead now if I hadn't joined the center. So that was terrific. But at the same time, when I joined, there was a piece of myself that was always, I'm always somebody who's kind of watching stuff. I interact with people, I'm sincere with people, but there's a piece of me that pays attention, that notices stuff. And when something comes up that doesn't make sense or doesn't fit, I sort of file it away in my this didn't fit box, right? For later use. I don't try to ignore it or anything. I just go, that's interesting, and I stick it on the shelf right over here. So I was at Progress Promise, and I don't remember if it was actually a celebration or if it was, I was back there a few other times, not during celebrations, and it was some kind of function, and there were a people, and I think they were a couple. I think it was a married couple, but they had been to India, and they had come back, and they had we're doing a slideshow. It's Progress Promise. It was the oi oi, please somebody do something. So like here's a fucking slideshow. It's like I hate slideshows, by the way.
Oh, God.
And being in the center destroyed slideshows for me for the rest of my life. I cannot really sit through a slideshow. Fortunately now with online stuff and the internet, and you don't really have to so much, but I just cannot do slideshows. Anyway, they're doing this lovely slideshow travelogue of India, and they come to this slide where it's a picture of one of those sort of tantric temple carvings with like penises and vaginas and people fingering people, and it's like cosmic gods and goddesses and all this sort of stuff. And it flashes on for a second, and Guru goes ballistic.
Oh.
So everyone in the room is watching this. Everyone's seeing the slide. We all know, oh, well, this isn't just like two people fucking. This is a metaphor for yin and yang. It's the divine duality merging as one. Blah blah blah. This is a metaphor. He goes ballistic and says, "Oi, oi, oi! I can't believe here in this place you are showing this filth. You are showing this horrible filth." And he goes on for like I don't know. It was probably 90 seconds of screaming and yelling. And the room fell dead silent. The people poor people that were showing the slideshow, obviously, wanted to just go kill themselves.
Yeah.
But that was probably my first big red flag, where I went, "Wow, that doesn't make any sense." That means this guy has big issues around this. I mean, at the time I was probably like 21 or 22 or something, and had not had much sexual experience. But I had spent way too much time reading Eastern philosophy and, the Bhagavad Gita and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I knew this was all metaphor. This was not just, people boinking. And he went ballistic as if they had just put up some kind of like porn picture had gotten mixed into the lovely slideshow. And so that was the first big red flag, and I filed that away. And so it definitely colored the way I started to look at that whole hidden piece of the center.
That's... Oh, go ahead.
Well, and I used to look at, Ashrita was like the city manager, of the center, but the close advisors were all girls, were all young, pretty girls.
They were all girls.
And I would look at this, and I would see that the way the girls would look at each other, and I was like, is it possible he's having sex with them? Yeah, it's totally possible. And I was okay with that. Because I also simultaneously ascribed to him, it's like, I don't know what the rules are for this guy, my guru, my spiritual master, who I believe is the one, and I checked out a few, and this was the guy that I felt the connection with, and I was just, I was just going to go with it. So on the one hand, it didn't, having those sort of ideas, and I don't consider myself psychic, but I do consider myself observant. And, I don't know that, I didn't know at the time that it was true. To me, it was just an idea that popped into my head, but it was an idea. It's like, well, that's probably there, So later on, after I'd left the center, when all the stuff was coming out about the shenanigans, that part didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was the coercive nature of it. That was disturbing. That was really disturbing.
That's the most disturbing, and actually, as a number of us have said time and time again, we don't care about the sex stuff. Who cares? However, what we do care about is the deceit, the hypocrisy, and the coerciveness, and the women have attested to the fact that there was pressure, there was coercion. However,
of course there's pressure. Of course there's pressure. It wasn't a peer relationship. I mean, it was literally incestuous. I mean, well, not literally. It was figuratively incestuous. This was supposed to be our spiritual father. We're all boys and girls. We're all his spiritual children. And for someone in that kind of position of authority to push themselves on his children there's elements of incestuous there. It's definitely abusive, because there's no way in that situation that the women could say, oh, you know what, I don't feel like this. This doesn't feel right to me.
That's not an option. That's not an option. And he referred to those women as his spiritual daughters. He used that term many, many times I heard him, his spiritual daughters, his spiritual sons. So it wasn't insensuous. And yeah, and the pressure was great. You know, how are you going to say no? How are you going to say no?
Well, and it sort of says something about his sexuality. And, you know, I'm not a psychologist, but, you know, the guy grew up on an ashram. You know, when he was a teenager, when he was going through puberty and stuff, you know, that anything in that realm was considered, you know, impure and undivine. So what do you do with it? I mean, you know, this this is how abusers get born, how abusers get made, really.
And I have a story. I have a story because your story triggered a memory of mine. In other words, in the light of everything that came out after we left the center about all the sex activities and the sexual exploitation of his spiritual daughters, his going all bonkers and aghast at pictures of, you know, temple drawings, as you say, symbolic, you know, yin and yang, or Prakriti and what's the other one? You know, the spirit and the matter. What is it?
Right.
Well, anyway, so I have a story like that, and in the light of something Alo Devi once said to us in the living room. She says, Guru is so pure that all these women, both the disciple women and non-disciple women, they're attracted to him, and they throw all their, you know, lower vital or sexual energy into him, and he has to not only fend it off, but he takes it and then he throws it into the cosmic consciousness, and he's so pure and blah blah blah. Now, my little story involves a disciple who's no longer with us. Her name was Geeta, a very good friend of mine. She lived in New York. Anyway, she had, you know, one day she discovered a lump on her breast, and she was, you know, very upset. And, you know, the whole thing in the center was, oh, no, you don't go to doctors, you don't do anything according to Western medicine, you go to Guru, and Guru solves all your problems. So she very innocently and naively asked for an interview. She got the interview, because she told me this story, and there's no reason that she would make anything up. So she goes to Guru, and he's saying, okay, good girl, you know, what's happening with you? And she tried to describe, like, Guru, I woke up this morning, I felt my breast, there's a lump in it, because again, she, you know, at that time, you don't go to doctor.
You're breaking up, Gary.
How's this? Okay. I'm going to try to be calm. How's this? Am I doing better?
Yeah, you were breaking up for a second there. I'm not sure what's going on.
Well, no, well, you know what? You were too, yeah. But, you know, it'll be okay. So anyway, as she's trying to describe her situation to Guru, he's sitting there. As soon as she started to say the B word, breast, he goes, oi, no, and he basically kicked her out of the room. He couldn't handle her saying, I have a lump on my breast. What should I do? Go to the doctor, do yoga, meditate on your picture. So
maybe he was wearing tight pants. He was getting all aroused. Who knows? Man?
That goes to show, though, what a conflict he must have had. You know, the whole thing going crazy over the temple images, and then a woman couldn't even tell him she had a lump in her breast. And then on one hand, there's that whole thing. On the other hand, he's bonking and having sex with all these young girl disciples. So the guy must have been messed up in his brain somehow. I don't know how he you know, put it all together and justified it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's actually kind of impressive when you look at it. I mean, in a totally yikes kind of way, but I mean, it is still amazing to me how he was able to keep the role together as well as he did. It's kind of amazing. And so, you know, when I picked him, when I felt he was my master, I thought because he was the guy, you know, I have to say I think I chose well, because there's some kind of strength of character in there that has a real twist to it. But in terms of sort of capacities and ability, that doesn't imply functionality necessarily, or that you're doing the right thing. But it's kind of amazing how he was able to maintain a pretty fucking good facade for a long time. Reminds me of another story, but anyway. Yeah, kind of impressive. You know, I'll go ahead and go with this other story, because we're sort of jumping around. We're not really going chronological, which is fine. But I was back in New York a while ago, and it was about, let's see, I'm thinking it was about 5 or 6 months after he died. So it was either, I can't remember when it was that he passed away. If it was like in the spring and this was in the fall, or if it was in the fall and this was in the spring, I can't remember. But I was back there, and I hadn't been back to Jamaica in forever. So this was right after he died. And I go out there and I'm looking around. I'm wondering if I'm going to meet anybody that I know, and I do. But I notice that there's this scaffolding up over all of the enterprises on Parsons Boulevard there. And I was like, wow, what's going on? Some kind of reconstruction. So I go into the Smile, and I run into and a couple people I recognize, but they don't want to talk to me. And a couple people I recognize, they do talk to me. And one of them was a guy who was from San Francisco named Ron Enquist. He had his spiritual name, and I don't remember what it was because he got it after I left. But I was saying, so what's going on with the buildings out here? And he said, oh, well, let me show you. And we walk out, and he said, if you look up the side of the building, we walked around the corner, and you could see that there was a crack about this wide that ran from the ground all the way up to the top of the apartments, which is, there's like 4 or 5 stories of apartments over the enterprises, right? And he says, for some reason, something's going on underground, and it's sinking, and the whole front of the building has detached. And I looked at him with a completely straight face, and I said, wow, it looks like the facade is collapsing.
Good.
And he goes, yeah. I said, don't you think it's sort of interesting that, like here we are, whatever, 6 months after Guru's passed, and here we're standing right at, this is the nexus. I mean, his house was his house, but that row of enterprises, as far as the manifestation of the center of the mission in the world, that was ground zero, right? That was geographically the spot. And it's, that's Ashrita's home base. That's where he does all his work from. That's where all the phone calls come into. That's ground zero of the physical manifestation. And literally the facade is collapsing. I thought that was hilarious. And the reason why it seemed so hilarious to me is because when I got out of the center, and could talk about that at some point if we want, but I'd always been a spiritual person since my young teenage years, and so I sort of felt like my discipleship, okay, that was done, and I really felt that there was this whole area, basically like, below the center of the chest, that had been completely neglected, suppressed, ignored, or whatever, and I wanted to try to connect spiritually with something that was a little more grounded, and so that led me into shamanic work. Did a lot of shamanic study and stuff, and that's shamanism isn't really it's not a religion at all, and it's not a spiritual system either. It's really, when you learn shamanic practice, it's kind of like going to like chiropractic school, or maybe like landscape design. It's really just tools and techniques, and you're dealing with stuff that's not just physical plane reality. But one of the things that comes out of that is you start to see a relationship energetically between what's going on in unseen, non-physical reality and things that end up manifesting on the physical reality. So going back there 6 months after the master had passed and seeing this happen is like, oh, well, that's obvious. Yeah, of course. There's something is trying to sink down into the ground here, and it's causing some destruction.
I mean, that's truly an amazing story, and how appropriate. And you are right, of course, that was the hub, and I do know that building very well because Dulal used to have an apartment, and so did Adarata in that building. I know it very well, and I was up there many times, and it's just so classic a situation with the facade. Falling down, And you're right, that was the hub, because between Guru Stationery, where that was Ashrita's office and his headquarters, and as you say, all the calls went through there, all the visitors checked in there, and the Smile of the Beyond up the street, and all the stores, Divine Robe Supreme, that was the hub. That was the the crossroads of the whole worldwide, the so-called worldwide mission. So, Paul, I want to switch the conversation. So you mentioned shamanic work. So after you left the center, you went into different things. So what are you doing now? What's going on for you now?
I mean, now I really just kind of try to be present. I sort of feel like, I'm 56 years old. I started, doing spiritual practices when I was 13. And so at this point, A, kind of bloody sick of it. But B, that's one of the burdens for me for this incarnation or whatever. That's the shape I was born into. So that's great. But I studied and did shamanic work for quite a while. I did just sitting practice, Buddhist practice for a while. Came up with a radically different idea of what meditation is compared. Go off a little bit. To me, what we did in the center, at least what. Oh, let me just speak for myself. What I did in the center. I mean, I was trying to do what I thought you were supposed to do, and all this stuff of throwing everything into the picture and concentrating on the picture, and it's awfully active, and it's really trying to be in a different place. It's like the opposite of being present. It's the opposite of kind of here and now. It's like trying to get somewhere else. I mentioned it in one of the blog posts, but that's what Sanjaban used to sort of jokingly call going out the top, right? The goal of like whatever we were doing there was to like out the top of your head and be in some sort of wow. It's away from Earth. It's away from here and now. It's I want to be someplace else. I mean, basically,
no, I was just going to say, no, finish up, because I think this is so great what you're saying now. I want to just jump in on it, but go ahead, finish up.
All right. Well, anyway, so now, I mean, I'm really trying to do more of what I consider actual meditation, which is really not doing anything. I like the Zen take on things because basically the Zen guys really just don't want to talk about anything. And if you make them talk about stuff, it basically makes them pissed off. So, but they don't even want to, call it meditating. They just want to call it sitting. They want to have as little doing as possible there, and really letting it just be. And so, wacky thoughts about where you're going to stick your dick that float through your head, you just let them float right by, and it doesn't make any difference, and they're not any better than anything else that appears. And, and I do meditate. I don't meditate like regularly every single morning. I go through periods where I do and periods where I don't, and it's basically relative to what I feel my own level of relative insanity is. If I'm kind of good and even keeled, don't really need to do it. If I'm starting to feel I'm dragging too much around with me, that's when I do it. And it's basically, my craziness is because I've got too many little things floating around in the air, and you sit and you be present and you actually see the stuff that's there, and somehow doing that breaks the tether to them or something. Weird things that happen with work and with people that work in my business and family and partners and ex-wives, and meditation, I can sit, that stuff sort of constellates, and I can see that it's just little whiffs of smoke, and they float away, and I don't need to do anything about them. I don't need to, a big one, I don't need to fix them. That's what I say again. I don't need to fix them. I don't need to fix any of that. And I don't need to fix any of me either. You know, that's the whole thing, is if you just sort of sit and be present, you kind of come into that enlightened space, and, you know, it literally, it's fine. It's just fine. There's not really a lot to do. You know? But if you can carry even a little bit of that space into the world, I really think there's something good that comes from that. You know, I'd like to think there is.
Well, listen, I'm with you. Believe me, you're hitting some tremendous points. I want to comment and put in my own 2 cents, because I think this is really important. But first of all, you mentioned your profession. What are you doing professionally? How you make
great.
living?
So that's a great story.
Yeah.
All right, let me tell a little bit of a story around that. So, what I'd always wanted to do for a living was be a musician. I played sax and guitar. I'd been told by various people that I respected that I had it, whatever that meant. Like, you know, I was going to make it, right? And so, you know, I became a disciple when I was 17. I was playing music. That wasn't happening. I still had to have other jobs. So, but I was very serious about music. My first and most powerful, one of the most powerful spiritual experiences I'd ever had was through music. And so when I became acquainted with the path, and the fact that Mahavishnu was a disciple and Devadeep was a disciple, it's like, oh, okay, well, this is going to work. It didn't really work so well. I mean, it worked if you were already rich and famous and a musician, but if you were sort of like a young person and that was going to be your direction, not really so hot, not really so good. You should really just sing Guru's songs and play Guru's music. So, yeah. So anyway, I needed to find something to do to make a living. I was working in a warehouse. It sucked. And Sumitra was my center leader. He had a wood shop, and he said, "Would you? We've got an opening. We need someone." They had a production line making these little wooden boxes. They were like stereo boxes, little folded boxes. He goes, "We need someone on the line. Would you like to do that?" And this was like working in a divine enterprise, and I hated my job. And he, unlike a lot of enterprises, Sumitra actually paid a real wage. I mean, he actually paid pretty much going wages for the kind of work you were doing. So that was kind of awesome. So I went to work there. That's where I met Sanjaban. I was working on the production line in what was called the box room. I worked there with Satyaki, Parabar worked there some, a string of new disciples who came and left. Dharmaja worked there for a little bit. Don Ackerman, another hilarious guy, completely wacko but totally hilarious. Anyway, I did that for a while, and that was production line work, and it was horrible. It was soul-killing. And plus, we were paid piece rate. So the faster you worked, the more money you made, and it really sucked. It was a terrible job. So then I got to actually manage that department, which actually just takes something that was horrible and then made you responsible for it, which makes it more horrible. And so I told Sumitra, I was like, this sucks. And he goes, well, you seem to be pretty good with your hands. And he had just brought out Sanjaban from Massachusetts because he needed a bona fide cabinet maker. And he'd been hiring non-disciples to do the cabinet work, and he wanted to try to have it be all disciples there if possible. So he brought Sanjaban, at least I think that's how it went. So he brought Sanjaban out, and then he wanted me to apprentice with Sanjaban to be a cabinet maker. And so I jumped at the chance. This sounded great. So I apprenticed with Sanjaban for probably a year or so, year and a half, and learned about cabinet making from him. He was an excellent woodworker, excellent cabinet maker. And he and I became absolute best buddies. And that was a great time. So then after that, I got promoted to be a cabinet maker. So now you're like a journeyman cabinet maker, and I was a cabinet maker on the floor in the shop, and it really started going downhill from there. Anyone else, it's because you need someone to help you move something that's too heavy for you to move. But otherwise, it's totally solitary. So I did not dig that, and I didn't know that about myself. I'd always thought I was kind of a loner, and this showed me, nope, you really need people around. So the whole thing happened. Sumitra left. That business was closed. I worked at a couple other cabinet shops. It sucked. I was unhappy, and so and during this whole period, the idea of being a professional musician and actually having that be my career really just kind of got ground right out of me. I couldn't maintain it. It was too much work. I was going against the grain in the center, and there wasn't time. It wasn't possible. So I was really, I was at a real low point there. I was really depressed. I hated my job, and at this point, the way I was seeing it was I had had 2 or 3 careers. There was also another little kind of woodworking related thing that I did in there that Dharmaja helped me set up, where I was doing furniture repair and stuff. That sucked too. And looked like this is going to be great. I'm going to love this. And I got in and did it for a while, and either it didn't work, or I couldn't make money at it, or I absolutely fucking hated it. And so I was kind of feeling like I'm fucked. I do not know what to do for a living. I cannot figure it out. And so I was talking about this with Satyaki, Michael Lindemann. I don't know if you remember him. He was my housemate.
Who's that, Satyaki?
Satyaki, yeah.
Yeah, no, I remember him. Yeah.
Okay. So I said, you know, I'm really thinking that I should just ask Guru what I should do for a living. And he, basically his response was, are you fucking insane? Like, why would you do that? Because what if he asked you to be like a yak herder? What if he asked you to be a shoe salesman?
And he might.
I said, you know what? I don't care, because I've tried all these different things. I thought these were all going to be great. They all ended up either in a dead end or just making me want to kill myself. I really don't think it can be any worse than that. And he's like, well, you know, do whatever you want, but you're nuts. So I wish I could remember the circumstances, because I was back in New York, and my memory is ephemeral to say the least, but I had somehow gotten the message to Guru that I wanted to ask him what I should do for a living. And it was funny, because as I was back in New York, and as I sort of mentioned this to various people, I would kind of get these kind of like sidelong glances, like, you know, we've seen other people go down this road and it hasn't always worked out all that well, you know. And I said, you know, I don't care. So anyway, he and I think this was also at Progress Promise, and I think, didn't he have like a little back room there? It was like his own.
Yes, that Progress Promise, there was a little back room. I never made it into the back room, and I'm happy I didn't, because who knows what went on in the back room, but I do remember the back room. Let me just say briefly, you know, you said I broke up before. You're breaking up too. Let's kind of bring it to a close, and we'll see how this comes out. But go ahead, the back room at Progress Promise.
Okay, so this is important, so I hope it comes through. So I go back there, and he's seated on his little seat, and he's meditating, right? He's not really looking at me, and I sit down, and he says, you know, my Lord Supreme is telling me that you should open a store like Pahar's. And I said, you want me to be a barber, Guru?
No.
And this is cool. This is great. He goes, I don't know what I'm saying. I don't know what I'm saying. I am only saying my Lord Supreme is saying you should open a store like Pahar's.
Oh, God.
I'm like, okay. So I know Pahar, and, you know, so I go talk with him, and he's like, well, you know, okay, you're in it now. And so he said, well, why don't you come in tomorrow? We'll get so-and-so to come in. He goes, you know, any idiot can cut hair, so... And he used whoever his assistant was at the time as an example of that, but I don't remember who that was. Anyway.
Was it Shundar? Was it Shundar? The guy from
don't-
Ireland, the very sweet, intelligent, and really charming and good-looking guy from Ireland, Shundar?
Well, if what you're meaning is the exact opposite of what you're saying, then it might have been, but I don't really remember. Anyway, so I tried it, and it didn't feel weird to me. So I went back to San Francisco, and at that time I was at a weird place, and I was thinking of moving to New York. And I literally did a coin toss. Should I stay in New York or should I go back to SF? And it ended up SF. So I went back to SF. And when I got back here, I started checking it out. And being a barber didn't really seem to work for me. But getting a cosmetologist license, which means you can cut men's or women's hair, seemed to have there seemed to be a road there. So I sent a message to Guru. I can go to barber school, but it's not really a great career, and it costs a lot of money. Or I can get a cosmetologist license at the community college. It costs almost nothing. Which should I do? And he said, do whatever you think is best. Now, the thing is, when I went into the cosmetology program, I was the only male in a class of 79 women.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I ended up marrying one of them.
Oh, God.
But the thing that was funny was when we started learning precision haircutting, I'd been a cabinet maker for 6 or 7 years. And when they started teaching precision haircutting to this room full of people who'd been styling their Barbie's hair and cutting their friend's hair and stuff, and started teaching precision haircutting, which is based on geometry, everybody in the class is like, well, what do these angles and elevations have to do with hair? And I'm like, I already know how to do this. I've been building cabinets from shop drawings, looking at plan views and elevations and sections, and I know what sections and elevations and angles and geometry is, and I'm good with my hands. And so I was a fucking prodigy in cosmetology school.
Wow.
I could already do it. I could do really advanced shit before I even graduated, and the teachers were like, "Oh my God, how do you know how to do this?" And it's like, I already know how to do this. I'm sorry.
No shit. Wow.
So I not only was I successful at it and good at it, I'm a very good stylist. I did actually end up for several years having a store that was virtually exactly like ours. It had 2 chairs, but I did women's hair. I didn't do men's hair. At this point, I left the center while I was in school, while I was in cosmetology school. Now I've got a salon that's a little bit bigger. But
wait, so you stayed with this from 1983, whenever you left the center, till now? You stayed with the cosmetology?
I love it.
Wow.
And the thing that's so funny is I could give a flying fuck whether I never cut another head of hair or not. But the thing is, it's with people. Everyone that comes in has something that they're not happy about, and I get to make that better. They're happier when they leave than when they came in. I'm able to create my own work environment. I've got a nice salon, and it's a lovely place to work. I literally have not had a single day where I didn't want to go to work.
Where is it?
Really like it. What?
Wait, where's your salon?
You can find my website. It's paulstrom.com. It's in Pacifica, California, which is where I used to live. I lived there for about 25 years.
I'm going to check it. I'm going to check it out. And when we come out to see, and listen, when we come out to see Rob Bruner's one-man show, Nephew of the Universe, I'm going to make sure I stop off one way or another in Pacific. I don't care how far away it is, and check out your thing. This is a great note to end on. That's a great story, and look, Guru inadvertently set you up with your future. So who knows?
Well, yeah, so that was one of the best things I got from him, and I know for a lot of people that piece didn't work out. For me, it's something I never would have considered. It was completely out of left field, but it fits with me in terms of something I can do to make a living that I actually feel good about. And I get to talk with people like you and I are talking, and I get a lot of people who come in where we connect on a sort of a practice, Buddhism, spiritual, shamanic, blah, blah, blah level, and we can actually talk about all this stuff.
It sounds great.
Wonderful. It's a great thing. So I'm actually grateful for that because I would have never considered it.
Hey, you know what? That's a great story, and that's a great note to end on. Let's have some final thoughts. You go first, and then I'll have a final thought or two, and we'll wrap it up. That's a great story, Paul. I mean, I'm serious. That's a great story. I thought you were going to wind up hating everything, but you found something great. That's wonderful.
No, I actually started out hating everything. I mean, when I was a teenager, I was pretty dark. Pretty dark, but boy, final note to end on. I have no idea. You know, at this point, I put one foot in front of the other. The practice I do is, I want to be who I am. I want to do what I'm here to do, and I don't know what that is. I mean, every day I think it's a little different. So that's my practice, such as it is. You know, I take lots of notes. I try to pay attention to stuff. I try to help people when I can. I try to be true to what I am, even though I actually don't really know what that is. It's kind of an in-the-moment thing. Being in the center was great for me. But it's, you know, it was kind of like high school. You know, it's like it's something you go in one side, and for me, come out the other. And I would have died if I hadn't gone in the center. I'm pretty sure about that. I learned some great stuff about myself. It was not an end for me. I wasn't going to stay there for the rest of my life. It started to feel like a something that I needed to do for a while. It was kind of a spiritual chiropractic that put some stuff back in line for me, and it was a huge help. It was formative for the person that I am, and I like who I am. And it was a big part of that. So for that, for what it actually was, for me, it was great. And I, you know, it didn't stop me from being who I am, and it didn't make me into something different. And I'm really glad that happened. I think if I'd stayed a lot longer, it would have, you know, it was starting to force me into a shape that did not feel authentic to me, and so that was where I had to step away. But that also was a good learning experience, because it also showed me that even if something seems really important and huge and it's your whole life, if something says you need to move, then that's what you need to do, and it's all going to be okay, right? Goethe talked about that, you know. Until you make a decision to do something, you know, once you make that decision, you set in motion forces that otherwise would not have happened. So, not be afraid of that. Yeah. So, okay, there you go.
I know that. Listen, I know that Goethe quote. I know it well. It influenced me, and you know, you summed it up perfectly. When you know, you have to make the first move. You have to have the intent, and then the universe aligns itself to support that. But until and unless you do that, it's just like you're just going to wallow in whatever where you are. I really can't add too much to what you said, because you really spoke for me. You know, I think one of the most important, you mentioned two things I'm just going to touch on briefly, and then we're going to close. Authenticity. That to me is the number one thing. You know, I left the center and you left the center, other people left the center, because I realized I could not be authentic. No, I could no longer be authentic, and now I'm living an authentic life, and so are you. And another thing is, I loved when you said you like yourself, you know, and I like myself. And there were many times in my life when I didn't, and I know damn well the same thing is for you. So we've come to a point where we're living authentically, or as authentically as we can, in the midst of whatever's going on, and we like ourselves. I wish, you know, it is my hope, my fervent hope, that every ex-disciple, every person that comes out of the center can arrive at, hey, I'm living an authentic life, and I like myself. And I'll tell you, it doesn't get much better than that as far as I'm concerned. Hey, Paul, thanks for doing that. You know, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen with the all the glitches, and I'm gonna play it back now. I'm gonna post it on YouTube and post it onto the Disciple site. But hey, man, you added so much. What a great stories. I can talk to you forever, man. But I want to cap it off.
I've got a lot of stories, Gary. I have a lot of.
I love these stories. Okay, Shanti, wonderful, wonderful, good boy, good boy. Great, man, you were great. Okay, that's it.